The silence of deep space was broken by the gentle hum of the orbital research station, New Horizon. As it drifted peacefully above the blue marble of Earth, Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the observation deck's viewport, watching the aurora borealis dance across the polar regions below. After 15 years of studying atmospheric phenomena, she still found herself mesmerized by the ethereal light show that painted the planet's magnetic field in brilliant greens and purples. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, are you coming to dinner? The voice belonged to her 12-year-old daughter Emma, whose head poked around the corner of the observation deck. Emma had been living on the station for 3 months now, part of the new family integration program that allowed researchers to bring their children to the orbital facilities during summer breaks. 5 more minutes, sweetheart, Sarah replied, not taking her eyes off the aurora display. I'm just finishing up some readings on the magnetic field fluctuations. Emma rolled her eyes with the exaggerated patience that only a preteen could muster. That's what you said an hour ago. Dad says the rehydrated lasagna is getting cold, which is apparently possible even in space. Sarah laughed, finally turning away from the viewport. Her husband David, the station's head of communications, had been experimenting with improving the taste of processed space food for months. It was one of those small domestic concerns that made life in orbit feel more like home and less like an extended scientific expedition. The New Horizon was humanity's crown jewel of peaceful space exploration. Built over 5 years by a consortium of 12 nations, it represented the best of human cooperation and scientific achievement. The station housed 43 researchers, engineers, and their families, all working together to push the boundaries of human knowledge about the cosmos. Unlike the military installations that had sprung up around Mars and the outer colonies, the New Horizon was dedicated purely to scientific research and the dream of understanding humanity's place in the universe. Dr. Marcus Webb, the station's chief scientist, often reminded the crew that they were living in the most peaceful era of human space exploration. The wars that had plagued Earth for centuries seemed like ancient history now that humanity had turned its attention to the stars. The station's mission statement, etched into a plaque in the main corridor, read, "To explore the cosmos in peace, to seek knowledge without conquest, and to represent the best of human curiosity." Sarah made her way through the station's corridors, past laboratories where teams of international scientists worked on everything from quantum communication to biological adaptation in zero gravity. The corridors were lined with photographs and artwork from Earth, a reminder of home for those who spent months at a time in the void. Children's drawings were scattered among the scientific diagrams, adding splashes of color and whimsy to the sterile environment. The dining hall was a warm, welcoming space designed to feel more like a family restaurant than a space station cafeteria. Round tables accommodated the various research teams and families, while large viewports showed the endless star field beyond. The gentle hum of conversation in multiple languages created a comforting background noise that made the vast emptiness of space feel less intimidating. "There she is," David called out as Sarah entered. He was a tall man with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I was beginning to think you decided to have dinner with the aurora instead of us." "The magnetic readings were particularly interesting tonight," Sarah said, settling into her chair next to Emma. "The solar-wind interaction patterns are unlike anything we've recorded before." Emma stabbed at her rehydrated lasagna with theatrical frustration. "Mom, you literally study the same lights every night. How different can they be?" "Each aurora is unique, like snowflakes," Sarah explained patiently. "The magnetic field variations tell us about solar activity, cosmic radiation, and the health of our planet's protective barrier. Tonight's reading suggests we might be entering a period of increased solar activity." Dr. Webb approached their table, carrying his own dinner tray. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm authority that came from decades of managing complex scientific projects. "Sarah, I hate to interrupt your family time, but I wanted to discuss those magnetic readings you mentioned. The data from the deep space monitoring arrays has been showing some unusual patterns as well." "What kind of patterns?" David asked, his communications background making him naturally curious about any anomalous signals. "Structured electromagnetic pulses from the outer system," Webb replied, sitting down at their table. Nothing that matches any known natural phenomena. We've been tracking them for about 6 weeks now, but they've been too faint and irregular to draw any definitive conclusions. Sarah felt a familiar tingle of scientific excitement. Could they be related to the magnetic field fluctuations I've been observing? It's possible, Webb said. The timing seems to correlate with your atmospheric readings. I was hoping we could coordinate our observations tomorrow and see if we can identify a pattern. Emma looked up from her lasagna, suddenly interested. Are you talking about alien signals? The adults exchanged glances. Webb smiled gently. We're talking about unexplained phenomena, Emma. In science, we don't jump to conclusions about extraterrestrial origins until we've exhausted all natural explanations. But it could be aliens, right? Emma pressed, her eyes bright with curiosity. Theoretically, yes, Webb admitted. But the universe is full of phenomena we don't understand yet. Pulsars, magnetars, quantum fluctuations, dark matter interactions. The cosmos is strange enough without needing to invoke little green men. Sarah reached over and ruffled Emma's hair. Your imagination is one of your best qualities, sweetheart. Just remember that good science means being skeptical and testing every hypothesis thoroughly. The conversation was interrupted by the gentle chime of the station's communication system. David's communicator buzzed, and he frowned as he read the message. That's odd. I'm getting a priority signal from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. They're requesting immediate contact with the station's senior staff. Webb's expression grew serious. At this hour? That's unusual. David, can you patch it through to the main communications center? Already on it, David replied, standing up from the table. Sarah, you might want to come with us. If this is related to those magnetic readings, we'll need your expertise. Emma started to follow them, but Sarah gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Finish your dinner, sweetheart. We'll be right back. But Mom, if it's aliens, I want to see. If it's aliens, which it probably isn't, you'll be the first to know, Sarah promised. But right now, it's most likely just a routine scientific consultation. The communications center was the technological heart of the New Horizon, filled with banks of monitors, quantum communication arrays, and processing equipment that kept the station connected to Earth and the various human colonies scattered throughout the solar system. The room hummed with the constant activity of data streams, telemetry feeds, and automated systems that monitored everything from life support to orbital mechanics. David settled into his chair at the main console while Sarah and Webb flanked him, watching as he established contact with the Deep Space Monitoring Network. The primary screen flickered to life, showing Dr. Jennifer Park, the director of the Titan Deep Space Observatory. Park was a stern woman in her 50s, known for her meticulous attention to detail and her reluctance to engage in speculation. Dr. Webb, Dr. Chen, Park said without preamble. Thank you for responding so quickly. We have a situation that requires immediate attention and analysis. What kind of situation? Webb asked. Approximately 37 minutes ago, our deep space arrays detected a massive object entering the outer solar system. The object is artificial, measuring approximately 4 kilometers in length, and it's moving at a velocity that suggests advanced propulsion technology. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Artificial? You're certain? The geometric patterns are unmistakable, Park replied. This is not a natural object. Furthermore, the electromagnetic signature matches some of the anomalous readings we've been tracking for the past 6 weeks. We believe this object has been broadcasting signals as it approached our solar system. David's fingers flew across his console, pulling up the telemetry data from the Titan Observatory. I'm seeing the readings now. The object is massive, and the energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Webb leaned forward, studying the data with the intensity of someone who had spent decades analyzing cosmic phenomena. The propulsion system appears to be some form of controlled gravitational manipulation. This is technology far beyond our current capabilities. There's more, Park continued. The object has altered course since entering our solar system. It's now on a direct trajectory toward Earth. The communications center fell silent except for the gentle hum of the equipment. Sarah found herself thinking of Emma, finishing her dinner just a few corridors away, completely unaware that humanity might be experiencing its first contact with an alien civilization. "How long until it reaches Earth?" Webb asked quietly. "At its current velocity, approximately 18 hours, Park replied. "We've already notified the Earth Defense Council and the International Space Command. They're mobilizing every available resource to monitor the situation." David pulled up a tactical display showing the object's trajectory. "It's not just heading toward Earth. It's heading directly for the orbital plane, where most of our space stations and satellites are located." Sarah studied the data, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. "The electromagnetic signatures you mentioned, are they consistent with communication attempts?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Park said. "The signals are highly structured and appear to be directed specifically at our major population centers and space installations. If they are communication attempts, the intelligence behind them has clearly studied our civilization and infrastructure." Webb stood up, pacing to the viewport that looked out at the star field. 4 kilometers long. That's larger than any structure humanity has ever built. If this is a ship, it could house thousands of individuals. Or it could be an automated probe, Sarah suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. Some civilizations might send unmanned explorers before making direct contact. "The energy readings suggest active life support and control systems," Park countered. "This isn't a probe. It's a vessel with living occupants." David's console chimed with an incoming priority message. "I'm receiving a transmission from the Earth Defense Council. They're requesting all orbital installations to prepare for potential first contact protocols." "First contact protocols?" Sarah asked. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I didn't know we had those." "They were developed quietly over the past decade," Webb explained. "The scientific community has been preparing for this possibility, even if the general public hasn't been informed. The protocols emphasize peaceful intentions, careful communication, and the protection of human interests." Emma's voice suddenly echoed through the communication center's intercom system. "Mom, Dad, are you guys okay? You've been gone for like an hour, and I'm bored." The adults looked at each other, realizing that their quiet scientific consultation had turned into something much more significant. Sarah pressed the intercom button. "We're fine, sweetheart. Just finishing up some important work. Why don't you start on your homework?" "Homework in space is still homework," Emma replied with theatrical despair. "Can I at least come see what you're working on? I promise I'll be quiet." Before anyone could respond, the main communications array erupted with activity. Alarms began sounding throughout the station, and David's console lit up with dozens of incoming priority messages. "What's happening?" Webb demanded. David's face had gone pale as he read the incoming data. "The object, it's broadcasting. Direct transmission to every major population center on Earth and every space installation in the solar system." "Broadcasting what?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. "A message," David replied. "And it's in perfect English." The main screen shifted to display the incoming transmission. The image was crystal clear, showing a being that was clearly not human. The creature stood approximately 3 meters tall, with elongated limbs and pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Its face was vaguely humanoid, but with features that were somehow both beautiful and alien. 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern, regarded the camera with an intelligence that was unmistakably ancient and powerful. When the being spoke, its voice was melodious but carried an undertone of absolute authority. "Greetings, inhabitants of the 3rd planet of this system. I am High Arbiter Zephyr of the Celestial Dominion. Your species has achieved spacefaring capability, which brings you under the jurisdiction of Dominion law." Sarah found herself holding her breath. This was it. First contact with an alien civilization. Everything humanity had wondered about, dreamed about, and feared was happening right now. "Your primitive expansion into space has been monitored and evaluated," Zephyr continued. "As is standard protocol for emerging civilizations, You are hereby offered the opportunity to join the Dominion as a subsidiary species. This status will provide you with protection, technological advancement, and a place within the greater galactic community. Webb's expression grew increasingly concerned. Subsidiary species? That doesn't sound like an equal partnership. In return for these benefits, Zephyr's voice continued, your species will contribute resources, labor, and compliance with Dominion regulations. Your military forces will be integrated into Dominion defense structures, and your technological development will be guided by Dominion oversight. David's hands clenched into fists. They're not offering us membership. They're offering us servitude. Furthermore, Zephyr said, your species' aggressive tendencies and chaotic expansion patterns pose a potential threat to galactic stability. Dominion membership will provide the necessary structure to contain these dangerous impulses. Sarah felt a surge of indignation. Dangerous impulses? We're peaceful explorers and researchers. You have been given 72 hours to consider this generous offer, Zephyr concluded. Failure to accept will result in your classification as a rogue civilization, subject to immediate correction. The Dominion has managed over 300 species across this galaxy. Your compliance is not merely requested. It is inevitable. The transmission ended, leaving the communication center in stunned silence. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, but the universe suddenly felt much less welcoming. Emma's voice came through the intercom again, confused and slightly frightened. Mom, Dad, why are there alarms going off? And why does the computer keep saying something about an emergency protocol? Sarah looked at her husband and realized that everything had changed. Their peaceful research station, their quiet family life, their dreams of exploring the cosmos, all of it was now overshadowed by the reality of an alien civilization that viewed humanity as just another species to be controlled. David, she said quietly, we need to call Emma in here. Are you sure? He asked. She's just a child. She's our child, Sarah replied. And she deserves to know what's happening to her world. Webb activated the station's internal communication system. Attention all personnel. This is Dr. Webb. Please report to the main conference room immediately for an emergency briefing. This is not a drill. As the crew of the New Horizon began gathering in the conference room, Sarah went to collect Emma from the dining hall. She found her daughter sitting alone at their table, staring out the viewport at the stars with an expression of confused worry. Mom, Emma said when she saw her, something's wrong, isn't it? I could hear the alarms, and everyone looks scared. Sarah sat down beside her daughter, choosing her words carefully. Emma, do you remember when we talked about the possibility of meeting other intelligent life in the universe? Emma nodded. You said it was possible, but that we shouldn't expect little green men. Well, it turns out I was right about the little green men part, Sarah said with a weak smile. But I was wrong about the possibility being remote. Emma's eyes widened. There are really aliens? Yes, sweetheart. And they've come to Earth to talk to us. That's amazing, Emma exclaimed, then noticed her mother's expression. Isn't it? Sarah pulled her daughter close. It's complicated, Emma. The aliens, they call themselves the Celestial Dominion. They want humanity to join their civilization. But they want us to join as junior partners who do what they tell us to do. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the serious consideration that children often bring to complex problems. So they want to be our bosses? That's one way to put it, Sarah agreed. And what happens if we say no? Sarah hesitated. They said they would correct us, which probably means they would force us to comply. Emma's expression grew indignant. That's not fair. They can't just show up and tell us what to do. No, they can't, Sarah agreed. But they're much more powerful than we are. Their ship is bigger than anything we've ever built, and their technology is far more advanced than ours. So we have to do what they say? Sarah looked at her daughter, seeing the same stubborn determination in Emma's eyes that had driven humanity to explore the stars in the first place. I don't know, sweetheart. That's what we're going to have to figure out. The conference room was filled with the quiet tension of 43 people trying to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. The crew of the New Horizon represented 12 different nations, But in this moment, they were simply humans facing an uncertain future. Dr. Webb stood at the front of the room, his usual calm demeanor showing cracks of stress. I know you've all heard the alarms and seen the emergency protocols activate. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to accept, but I need you to remain calm and think clearly. He activated the main display, showing the image of High Arbiter Zephyr. Approximately 2 hours ago, humanity received its first communication from an extraterrestrial civilization. The being you see here represents something called the Celestial Dominion, which claims to govern over 300 species across the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, the station's chief engineer, raised her hand. Dr. Webb, are we certain this isn't some kind of elaborate hoax? The electromagnetic signatures, the technology demonstrated, and the sheer scale of the approaching vessel make deception highly unlikely, Webb replied. We're dealing with technology that's centuries beyond our current capabilities. What do they want? Asked Dr. Kim Petrov, the station's chief medical officer. Webb played the recorded message from High Arbiter Zephyr, and the room fell silent as the crew listened to the alien's ultimatum. When the message ended, the silence stretched for several long minutes. Finally, Dr. Chen Wei, the station's chief of physics, spoke up. They're offering us protection and advancement in exchange for what amounts to colonial status. This is exactly what more advanced civilizations have done to less advanced ones throughout human history. But we're not talking about human civilizations, Rodriguez pointed out. We're talking about beings with technology that could destroy us if we refuse. Emma, who had been sitting quietly beside her mother, suddenly stood up. The adults looked at her with surprise, not expecting the youngest person in the room to speak. Excuse me, Emma said with the polite formality she used when addressing adults she didn't know well. I have a question. Webb smiled gently. Of course, Emma. What would you like to know? Well, I was just thinking about what the alien said. He said that our species has aggressive tendencies and chaotic expansion patterns. But that's not true, is it? I mean, this station is all about peaceful research and cooperation. The adults exchanged glances. Webb nodded encouragingly. You're absolutely right, Emma. This station represents the best of human cooperation and peaceful exploration. So the alien is either lying or he doesn't understand humans very well, Emma continued. And if he doesn't understand us, then maybe his assumptions about what we can and can't do are wrong too. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her daughter's logical thinking. That's a very good point, sweetheart. I mean, Emma continued, warming to her theme, he said that resistance is inevitable, right? But how would he know? Has he ever met humans before? Dr. Webb's expression grew thoughtful. From the perspective of the Dominion, they've probably encountered hundreds of species, and they've all eventually submitted to their authority. They have no reason to believe humans would be different. But we are different, Emma said with conviction. My mom always says that humans are curious and stubborn, and that we never give up on solving problems. Maybe that's what makes us different from the other species. Commander Patricia Hayes, the station's military liaison, had been quiet throughout the briefing, but now she spoke up. The child has a point. The Dominion's message assumed that we would be intimidated by their technology and their threats, but they didn't account for human psychology. What do you mean? Webb asked. I mean that humans have a history of fighting against overwhelming odds when their freedom is threatened, Hayes replied. The Dominion expects us to make a rational calculation about our chances of survival and submit accordingly. But humans don't always make rational decisions when it comes to freedom. Dr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. You're suggesting that the Dominion might have miscalculated? I'm suggesting that they might not understand what they're dealing with, Hayes said. They see a primitive species with inferior technology. They don't see a species that fought its way to the top of the food chain on a hostile planet, and then turned their attention to conquering space. Emma clapped her hands together. Exactly. And besides, if they're so powerful and advanced, why do they need us to join them? Why not just leave us alone? The adults fell silent, considering this question. Finally, Dr. Chen Wei spoke up. Because they need something from us. Resources, labor, strategic positioning, something that makes controlling us worth the effort. Which means we have leverage, Commander Hayes concluded. We have something they want, which gives us negotiating power. Webb stood up, pacing to the viewport. The question is whether we use that leverage to negotiate better terms of submission or to resist entirely. What would resistance look like? Asked Drive. Petrov. I don't know, Webb admitted. We're talking about a civilization that's been spacefaring for potentially thousands of years. Their technology, their resources, their experience, everything favors them. Emma stood up again, this time with the determined expression that Sarah recognized as her daughter's problem-solving face. Can I say something else? Of course, Webb replied. Well, I was just thinking about what my mom always says when I have a problem that seems too big to solve. She says that big problems are just lots of little problems stuck together, and if you solve the little problems one at a time, eventually the big problem gets solved too. Sarah smiled despite the gravity of the situation. That's right, sweetheart. Break complex problems down into manageable pieces. So maybe we can't fight their big ships or their advanced technology, Emma continued. But maybe we can solve some of the little problems that would make it harder for them to control us. Commander Hayes leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of little problems? Emma thought for a moment. Well, they said they govern 300 species, right? That's a lot of different groups to keep track of. And they probably have rules and procedures for how they manage everyone. But they don't have rules for managing humans yet, because they've never met us before. You're suggesting that their inexperience with our species might be a weakness, Dr. Chenwei said. Exactly. And also, they're probably really used to other species being afraid of them and doing what they're told. But what if humans don't act scared? What if we act like we're not impressed? The room fell silent as the adults processed this suggestion. Finally, Dr. Rodriguez spoke up. The psychological impact of appearing unintimidated could be significant. If they're accustomed to species submitting immediately, our refusal to show fear might be disorienting. But we are afraid, Dr. Petrov pointed out. At least I am, Emma shrugged. Sure, but being afraid and acting afraid are different things. My mom gets scared sometimes when she's working on dangerous experiments, but she doesn't act scared because that would make mistakes more likely. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and concern as she watched her 12-year-old daughter casually discuss psychological warfare with humanity's first alien contact. Emma, you're suggesting that we bluff? I'm suggesting that we don't let them think they know us better than they do, Emma replied. They think they understand human psychology, but they don't. They think we'll act like all the other species they've conquered, but we won't. Webb returned to his position at the front of the room. Let's assume for a moment that Emma is right and that we have advantages the Dominion doesn't expect. What would be our next step? Commander Hayes consulted her tablet. We need to contact Earth immediately and share our analysis. The governments down there are probably in crisis mode trying to figure out how to respond to the ultimatum. But we also need to be prepared for the possibility that Earth's governments might choose to submit, Webb added. The Dominion's offer includes protection and technological advancement. From a purely pragmatic standpoint, submission might seem like the safer option. What about the people who don't want to submit? Emma asked. Don't they get a choice? The adults exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah realized that her daughter was asking the fundamental question that would determine humanity's future. Would they remain free to choose their own path, or would they accept the safety of servitude? That's exactly what we need to figure out, Webb said. And we need to figure it out quickly. We have less than 70 hours to make a decision that will affect the entire human species. The meeting continued for several more hours, but no clear consensus emerged. The crew of the New Horizon represented the best of human scientific cooperation. But they were researchers and explorers, not military strategists or political leaders. They could analyze the situation, identify potential advantages and disadvantages, and propose theories about Dominion psychology, but they couldn't make the decision for humanity. As the meeting finally broke up, Sarah found herself walking back to the family quarters with Emma and David. The corridors that had seemed so welcoming a few hours ago now felt like the interior of a fragile bubble floating in a hostile universe. Mom, Emma said quietly as they walked, what do you think will happen? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think humans will do what humans always do when faced with an impossible choice. We'll find a third option that nobody else thought of. What if there isn't a third option? Emma pressed. Then we'll make one, David said firmly. That's what humans do. We don't accept that problems are unsolvable. We keep looking for solutions until we find one. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. So we're not going to be slaves? Not if we can help it, Sarah replied. And not without a fight. As they reached their quarters, Sarah realized that the last few hours had changed everything, not just for humanity as a species, but for her family personally. Emma had shown a level of strategic thinking and psychological insight that surprised even her parents. David had demonstrated the kind of quiet determination that made him an excellent partner in both research and life. And Sarah herself had discovered that her protective instincts as a mother were even stronger than her curiosity as a scientist. The New Horizon continued its peaceful orbit around Earth, but the crew was no longer the same group of researchers who had sat down to dinner that evening. They were now humanity's first witnesses to alien contact, and potentially its first line of defense against an alien empire that had conquered 300 other species. Outside the viewport, the stars looked exactly the same as they had that morning. But now Sarah knew that some of those stars were home to species that had faced the same choice humanity was facing now. Some had chosen submission and safety. Others had chosen resistance and possibly extinction. In less than 70 hours, humanity would discover which path it would take. But for tonight, Sarah tucked her daughter into bed, kissed her husband goodnight, and tried to pretend that the universe was still the safe, predictable place it had been that morning. The gentle hum of the station's life support system seemed different now, less like the comforting sound of home and more like the steady heartbeat of a species that was about to discover what it was truly capable of when pushed to the brink. The emergency session of the United Earth Council convened in Geneva exactly 18 hours after High Arbiter Zephyr's ultimatum. President Maria Santos sat at the head of the oval table, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of strain. Around her, the leaders of every major nation argued in hushed, urgent tones, while holographic displays showed the massive Dominion vessel maintaining its position just beyond Earth's orbital defense grid. General Patricia Kim, head of Earth's Unified Defense Command, stood before the assembly with a grim expression. Ladies and gentlemen, our analysis is complete. The alien vessel possesses technology approximately 3 centuries beyond our current capabilities. Their energy shields could deflect our most powerful weapons, and their own armaments could level entire cities from orbit. Chancellor Heinrich Müller of the European Federation leaned forward. General Kim, are you recommending surrender? I'm presenting facts, Kim replied diplomatically. The tactical reality is that conventional resistance would be suicidal. However, our xenopsychology teams have identified some interesting patterns in the Dominion's approach. Dr. Amara Okafor, Earth's leading expert in interspecies communication, activated her presentation display. The Dominion's message followed classic intimidation protocols. They demonstrated overwhelming power, set an impossible deadline, and framed submission as the only rational choice. This suggests they're accustomed to species that respond predictably to such pressure. Prime Minister Yuki Tanaka of the Pacific Coalition raised her hand. Dr. Okafor, are you suggesting they might not understand human psychology? Precisely, Okafor replied. Their approach assumes we'll make decisions based purely on survival calculations. They don't account for cultural factors, emotional responses, or what humans call stubbornness. Meanwhile, aboard the New Horizon, Emma Chen was having her own strategy session. The 12-year-old had convinced her parents to let her attend the adult planning meetings, arguing with irrefutable logic that her insights the previous day had been valuable. Now she sat in the station's main conference room, surrounded by some of humanity's brightest minds, calmly eating a sandwich while the adults debated complex military scenarios. The problem, Dr. Webb was saying, is that we're thinking like scientists when we should be thinking like the species that survived the Ice Age, built pyramids, and put people on Mars. Commander Hayes nodded. Webb's right. We're overthinking this. The Dominion expects rational submission from a rational species. But humans aren't always rational, especially when someone threatens our families. Emma swallowed a bite of her sandwich and raised her hand. Can I ask something? Has anyone tried talking to other species that the Dominion conquered? The adults paused their discussion. Dr. Rodriguez looked puzzled. Emma, we don't have any way to contact other alien species. But we do, Emma replied matter-of-factly. The Dominion said they govern 300 species. Some of those species must be good at communication, right? And if the Dominion has been broadcasting to us, they probably have some kind of universal translation system. Sarah Chen felt a familiar surge of pride in her daughter's logic. Emma, are you suggesting we try to contact the Dominion's other subjects? I'm suggesting we find out what happened to species that said no, Emma clarified. Did any of them survive? Are any of them still fighting? Maybe we're not as alone as the Dominion wants us to think. David Chen, monitoring communications from his console, suddenly looked up with excitement. Emma might be onto something. I've been analyzing the Dominion transmission protocols, and they're incredibly sophisticated. But that sophistication suggests they need to communicate with hundreds of different species regularly. Their network must be vast. Dr. Webb stood up, pacing with the energy of someone who had just realized something important. If we could access their communication network, we might be able to gather intelligence about their operations, their other subjects, maybe even their weaknesses. That's assuming we could hack into the most advanced computer system ever encountered, Dr. Chen Wei pointed out. Emma finished her sandwich and wiped her hands on her napkin. Actually, that might not be as hard as you think. The adults looked at her expectantly. Emma stood up and walked to the main display, pointing at the analysis of the Dominion's transmission. Look at how they organize their message. It's really formal and structured, right? Like they're following rules. Administrative protocols, Commander Hayes agreed. Military organizations love their procedures. Exactly, Emma said. And what happens when you have really complicated rules that everyone has to follow? Sarah was beginning to see where her daughter was going. You create systems to help people follow those rules. Right! So if the Dominion has to manage 300 species, they probably have automated systems to help with communication, translation, record-keeping, all that stuff. And automated systems have to be programmed by someone. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes widened. And programmers make assumptions about how their systems will be used. They probably never imagined that one of their subject species would try to hack into their network, David added, his communication expertise making him particularly excited by the possibility. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Plus, they think we're primitive. They probably don't have very good security against our kind of technology because they think we're too stupid to be dangerous. Dr. Webb returned to his seat with a thoughtful expression. Even if we could access their network, what would be our objective? Intelligence gathering? Sabotage? Communication with other species? All of the above, Commander Hayes replied. But first, we need to know if this is even possible. Back on Earth, the political debate was intensifying. President Santos had received preliminary reports from scientific installations around the globe, and the consensus was troubling. Every analysis confirmed that the Dominion possessed overwhelming technological superiority, but they also suggested that humanity possessed certain advantages that the aliens might not expect. Director James Clark of the International Intelligence Agency presented his findings to the Council. Our psychological profiles suggest that the Dominion operates on principles of hierarchical authority and administrative efficiency. They're not conquerors in the traditional sense. They're administrators managing a galactic bureaucracy. What's the difference? Asked President Santos. Conquerors expect resistance and plan for it, Clark explained. Administrators expect compliance and become confused when their procedures don't work. If we can disrupt their administrative expectations, we might create opportunities that wouldn't exist in a traditional military conflict. Foreign Minister Chen Wei had been quiet throughout the session, but now she spoke up. Director Clark, are you recommending that we reject the ultimatum? I'm recommending that we respond in a way the Dominion doesn't expect, Clark replied. They've given us 72 hours to submit or face correction, but they haven't defined what correction means, and they haven't explained their timeline for implementation. President Santos looked around the table. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we use their own administrative protocols against them, Clark said. We respond to their ultimatum with a counterproposal that forces them to engage in negotiations rather than simple submission. Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion vessel Eternal Harmony, High Arbiter Zephyr was experiencing something he had never encountered in 3 centuries of administrative service: confusion about a species' response to standard integration protocols. Sub-Arbiter Lith approached his superior with a tablet displaying the latest communications from the human planet. "High Arbiter, we have received a response from the Earth governments." "Excellent," Zephyr replied, settling into his administrative chair. "I trust they have accepted integration status with appropriate gratitude?" "The response is unusual, High Arbiter." Lith's 4 eyes flickered with uncertainty. "They have submitted what they call a, quote, counter-proposal for mutual cooperation." Zephyr's expression remained calm, but internally he felt a flicker of annoyance. "Sub-Arbiter, please clarify. Species do not submit counter-proposals. They submit acceptance or face correction." "Yes, High Arbiter, but the humans appear to be unaware of this protocol. They have requested clarification of integration terms, proposed alternative arrangements for resource sharing, and asked for cultural autonomy guarantees." "They are negotiating," Zephyr said with disbelief. "They believe this is a diplomatic exchange, rather than an administrative directive." Lith consulted her tablet. "Furthermore, High Arbiter, they have requested a face-to-face meeting with Dominion representatives to discuss what they call mutually beneficial arrangements." Zephyr stood up and walked to the viewport, looking down at the blue planet that was causing such unprecedented complications. In 3 centuries of service, he had overseen the integration of 47 species. All had followed this same pattern: initial shock, rational assessment of their situation, and prompt submission to Dominion authority. None had ever requested negotiations. "Sub-Arbiter, what does protocol dictate for species that attempt to negotiate integration terms?" Lith checked her administrative database. "High Arbiter, there is no protocol for such a situation. The possibility was not anticipated in Dominion administrative guidelines." "Then we must create new protocol," Zephyr decided. "Schedule a communication with the human leadership. We will clarify that integration is not subject to negotiation." But as the hours passed, Zephyr found himself dealing with an increasingly complex situation. The humans responded to each clarification with additional questions. They wanted to know about Dominion governance structures, resource allocation methods, and cultural preservation policies. They treated every Dominion statement as the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of one. More troubling was the humans' apparent lack of fear. Other species had trembled before Dominion power, but the humans seemed merely curious. They asked technical questions about Dominion technology, requested tours of the vessel, and even invited Dominion representatives to visit Earth for cultural exchanges. Aboard the New Horizon, Emma's suggestion about hacking the Dominion network had evolved into a full-scale intelligence operation. David Chen had successfully identified the communication protocols used by the Dominion's administrative systems, and Dr. Rodriguez had developed methods for accessing their data streams without detection. "We're in," David announced quietly, his voice filled with amazement. "I can't believe it, but we're actually accessing their network." Dr. Webb leaned over David's shoulder, watching streams of alien data flow across the screens. "What are we seeing?" "Administrative records," David replied. "Personnel files, resource allocation reports, species integration status updates. It's like we've hacked into the galaxy's largest bureaucracy." Emma, who had been watching the data streams with fascination, suddenly pointed at one of the displays. "Dad, look at that section there. Those look like communications between different species." David switched to the communication logs, and the room fell silent as they realized what they were seeing. "These are messages between species that have been integrated into the Dominion," he said slowly. "Some of them are requesting assistance, others are reporting problems, and a few are complaining." Dr. Rodriguez finished. "They're complaining about Dominion administration." Emma clapped her hands together. "They're not happy. Some of the Dominion species aren't happy with being controlled." Dr. Webb studied the data more carefully. According to these records, 17 species have filed formal grievances about Dominion policies in the past year alone. 3 have requested independence hearings, and 2 have been classified as, quote, administratively problematic. "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. David pulled up the relevant files. "Species that don't follow Dominion procedures properly. They seem to cause administrative headaches by not understanding their place in the hierarchy." Emma was practically bouncing with excitement. "This is perfect!" The Dominion isn't as powerful as they pretend to be. They have problems with their own subjects. Commander Hayes studied the intelligence with a tactical perspective. This changes everything. If the Dominion is dealing with internal dissent, they may not be able to commit full resources to correcting Earth. More importantly, Dr. Chenwei added, it suggests that resistance is possible. If other species are causing problems for the Dominion, maybe humans can cause bigger problems. Emma raised her hand again. Can we talk to some of these unhappy species? Maybe we can make friends. Sarah looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Emma, you're suggesting we form an alliance with alien rebels. I'm suggesting we find out who else thinks the Dominion isn't as great as they claim to be, Emma clarified. Maybe they can teach us things about how to be problematic. The breakthrough came when David discovered communication logs between a species called the Cathara and several other Dominion subjects. The Cathara had been classified as administratively problematic for refusing to follow standard resource allocation protocols, and their messages revealed a sophisticated network of species sharing information about Dominion weaknesses. The Cathara have been in contact with 43 other species, David reported. They're sharing strategies for what they call, quote, administrative resistance. Nothing violent or directly confrontational, just ways to make Dominion management more difficult. Dr. Webb looked fascinated. What kind of strategies? David scrolled through the communications, creative interpretation of orders, deliberate inefficiency in resource production, cultural practices that interfere with Dominion scheduling, and something they call confusion protocols, where they pretend not to understand administrative directives. Emma laughed. They're being passive-aggressive with a galactic empire. And apparently it works, Commander Hayes observed. According to these records, species that employ administrative resistance receive significantly less attention from Dominion oversight. Sarah realized what her daughter had discovered. Emma, you've identified a weakness in their system. The Dominion is designed to manage compliant species, not to deal with persistent administrative problems. Exactly, Emma said. And humans are really good at being administratively problematic. We've been driving bureaucracies crazy for thousands of years. The final phase of the human response came together when President Santos received the intelligence gathered by the New Horizon team. The political implications were staggering. Humanity was not facing a choice between submission and annihilation, but between compliance and becoming the galaxy's most troublesome administrative problem. Dr. Okafor presented the xenopsychological analysis to the United Earth Council. The Dominion operates on the assumption that rational species will choose survival over freedom. But they've never encountered a species that views freedom as essential to survival. General Kim added the military perspective. Our analysis suggests that the Dominion's correction protocols are designed for species that resist with conventional force. They may not be prepared for the kind of asymmetric resistance that humans excel at. President Santos made the decision that would define humanity's future. We respond to their ultimatum with a message that demonstrates exactly what kind of species they're dealing with. The response was delivered by Emma Chen herself, broadcasting from the New Horizon to every Dominion communication channel simultaneously. The 12-year-old sat calmly in front of the camera, wearing her school clothes and speaking with the matter-of-fact tone that only children can master. Hi, Arbiter Zephyr, Emma began cheerfully. My name is Emma, and I'm speaking for all the humans. We got your message about joining your Dominion, and we have some questions. Aboard the Sky Eternal Harmony, Zephyr watched this unprecedented communication with growing bewilderment. No species had ever responded to integration directives with a child representative, and no child had ever addressed him with such casual familiarity. First, Emma continued, we're curious about your employee satisfaction rates. According to your own administrative records, 17 species filed grievances last year, and 2 were classified as problematic. That seems like a high turnover rate for happy subjects. Zephyr's 4 eyes widened in shock. The humans had somehow accessed Dominion administrative networks, a feat that should have been impossible for a primitive species. Second, Emma said, consulting notes written in crayon, we're concerned about your definition of quote, correction. When humans make mistakes, we usually get sent to our rooms or have to do extra chores. We're wondering if Dominion correction is similar, because that would actually be kind of manageable. Sub-Arbiter Lith approached Zephyr with an expression of complete confusion. "Hi, Arbiter. How should we respond to this?" "Third," Emma continued, apparently oblivious to the chaos she was causing aboard the Dominion vessel. "We've been talking to some of your other subjects, and they've shared some really interesting strategies for dealing with administrative problems. We're particularly impressed with the Cathara's approach to creative compliance." Zephyr realized with growing horror that the humans had not only accessed Dominion records, but had also made contact with rebellious subjects. This was supposed to be a simple administrative integration, but it was rapidly becoming the most complex situation of his career. "Finally," Emma said, her cheerful tone never wavering, "we want you to know that humans are really good at being confusing and difficult to manage. We've had thousands of years of practice with bureaucracies, and we've gotten really creative about finding loopholes and causing administrative headaches." She paused to take a sip from a juice box before delivering the final blow. "So here's our counterproposal. You can try to correct us if you want, but we should probably warn you that humans are the species that turned tax preparation into a form of psychological warfare. We're going to be way more trouble than we're worth." Emma smiled brightly at the camera. "But if you want to be friends and maybe trade some of your cool technology for some of our really good food, we'd be happy to talk about that instead. My mom makes the best space lasagna in the solar system." The transmission ended, leaving the Dominion command staff in stunned silence. Zephyr had dealt with aggressive species, fearful species, and desperately negotiating species, but he had never encountered a species that treated galactic domination as a minor inconvenience and offered to share recipes. "Hi, Arbiter," Lith said quietly. "What are your orders?" Zephyr looked at the blue planet below, realizing that his 3 centuries of administrative experience had not prepared him for humanity. The humans had violated every assumption about species behavior, demonstrated capabilities they shouldn't possess, and somehow turned a submission ultimatum into a cultural exchange proposal. "Sub-Arbiter," he said finally, "contact Dominion Central Command. Inform them that the Earth integration requires specialized protocols. Should we proceed with correction procedures?" Zephyr considered the question carefully. The humans had demonstrated access to Dominion networks, contact with rebellious subjects, and a psychological profile that suggested they would indeed be administratively problematic. More troubling was their apparent lack of respect for Dominion authority and their casual treatment of galactic politics as a friendly conversation. Negative, he decided. Flag this system for extended evaluation. The humans require further study before integration protocols can be properly implemented. It was the first time in Dominion history that a species had been granted a reprieve simply because they were too confusing to conquer efficiently. Aboard the Namton New Horizon Namton 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 Namton. Sarah pulled her daughter into a hug. "Emma, I think you just saved humanity by being yourself." "Cool," Emma replied. "Can we have dinner now?" All that diplomacy made me hungry. As the Chen family headed to the dining hall, David's communication console lit up with messages from around the solar system. The human response to the Dominion ultimatum had been broadcast across every communication channel, and the reaction was enthusiastic. Humanity had found its voice in the galaxy, and that voice belonged to a 12-year-old girl who treated alien overlords like slightly annoying adults who needed better customer service policies. The Dominion vessel remained in position for several more days, apparently waiting for new instructions from their central command. When those instructions finally came, they were unprecedented. Earth was to be classified as a, quote, culturally unique species requiring specialized integration protocols, and placed under extended observation rather than immediate correction. It was bureaucratic language for something that had never happened before. The Dominion had decided that conquering humanity was more trouble than it was worth. 6 months later, Emma Chen received her first interspecies pen pal letter from a young Cathara, who had seen her broadcast and wanted to share creative compliance strategies. The letter was the beginning of what would become known as the Junior Galactic Correspondence Club, an organization that would eventually include young members from 47 species and drive Dominion administrators to distraction with its cheerful disregard for proper communication protocols. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not through superior technology or military might, but through the simple power of being too uniquely human for anyone to know quite what to do with them. And it all started with a 12-year-old girl who believed that even galactic overlords needed to mind their manners. The dinner bell aboard the New Horizon still rang every evening at the same time, calling families together for meals and conversation. But now it rang with a different meaning. Not just as a call to gather, but as a reminder that the most powerful force in the universe might just be a human parent calling their children home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.